To talk about this bad boy, the C100, the Mark I, although a lot of this applies to the Mark II as well, and I have shot with the Mark II. In fact, the reason I bought the C100 Mark I is because I did shoot with the Mark II for several years at the company I used to work for, which was a web media production company that I worked for well over a decade. And we'd acquired a C100 Mark II there on my request, and we had started going around shooting client videos with it, and I loved it. I loved that camera. And my goal was, I had bought the GH4 here actually for myself, both as a stills camera and a video camera, and I wanted to get into 4K and check that out, and I started doing work with the GH4 for a couple of years. And then I decided about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, that I wanted to get myself a C100 as well, which sounds like an odd step, going from 4K with the GH4 back down to 1080p with the C100, but to me it's a lot about workflow. And I love the image off the C100. It's 1080p, it's got a 4K sensor, but it's a 1080p image that it saves. And to me, that's fine. In fact, I don't think I've produced, outside of these YouTube videos, all of my client videos that I produce are 1080p videos, and nobody's ever complained about it. I've never complained about it. They look great. I've had them projected on big screens at events. I've had them on television. I've had them all over the web, and nobody has any issue with the fact that they're 1080p. 1080p still today in 2020 is a very viable resolution, especially coming off of a camera like a C100, where you've got that 4K sensor that crunches that data down into a nice, tight, sharp 1080p image and gives you that lush Canon color and look. And so it was really mostly about having the other perks and benefits of the C100. The things like the 6 stops of built-in ND filters with this nice little filter wheel here, which is super handy and is not something you get on any DSLR or any mirrorless camera. The other thing is the XLR audio. Although not built in, it comes out and it attaches with this wire. It's pretty much like it's built in, at least for the way it acts. The other thing about the camera is like I said, I love that Canon color. I love the fact that I can use those Canon lenses, and I love the big batteries on the back. These things last me all day long, almost all day long. I literally change these things. If I am shooting all day long, like if I'm doing like an 8 or 10 hour day, I literally have to change this battery like one time. And even then, that second battery that I put on the camera, when at the end of the day, I've still got 80 to 85% of the power left on that one, because these things just go for hours and hours. And it's really nice not to have to worry about that. And the other benefit to the C100 is the fact that it is a 1080p camera. And although I would prefer 4K in a lot of ways, because it's nice to have 4K, as a file, it's also, there's a drawback to it when it comes to file sizes. My GH4, for example, is a fairly efficient 4K camera in that it shoots 100 megabits per second. But this bad boy shoots 24, 25 megabits per second, something like that. And so I'm literally saving 75% of my disk space when I shoot something on the on the C100 versus the GH4. I'm saving a ton of space. And that's because I'm getting an image that's, a quarter the size, in terms of like the amount of pixels compared to the GH4. And yet it's still a really great image. And it still looks great on, televisions and big screens and things like that. It still holds up really well. In fact, I've even upscaled some images off of here to 4K, and it's a tad softer. Obviously, it's not going to be as sharp as a native 4K camera or a 6K camera downscaled to 4K, but it still looks really great. The image still looks really solid. That color, that contrast, the sharpness, it all still carries through really well, even when the footage is upscaled. And even in a lot of ways, when you punch in on the footage a bit, I've increased the footage 125%, like to try and do a crop, push in a crop a bit if I'm really tight, although I do try to shoot and frame for the final image. I like the camera. I think especially in 2020, the price of the camera is very compelling. I bought these last year, maybe 2 years ago almost. and I got a really good deal. I got 2 of them for the price of one C100 Mark II at the time. So that's why I had to jump on this one instead of the Mark II. Although I prefer the Mark II's viewfinder and LCD screen. Other than that though, the other difference is that the Mark II will shoot 60p, whereas this will shoot only 60i, 30 frames a second, 30p, 24p, or 60i. So there are people that have done 60i and tried to convert it for doing slow motion with this camera, and they've gotten some okay results. I'm not a slow motion shooter myself though, so that's never been an issue. Even when I was shooting with the Mark II, I shot 60i once for one shot, and that was it out of the 3 years I worked with that camera or whatever. So it was never a feature that I was big about. Personally, I still think this is a great camera, and these days for the price you can get them for, I mean they are a bargain, especially with the built-in NDs, the XLR audio. They got the clean full-size HDMI output. It is of course 8-bit 420, so you can only grade the footage to a certain degree, but it's actually pretty robust for what it is, surprisingly. The only downside of this camera, in my opinion, outside of, the not having RAW or 4K 10-bit or anything like that, or image stabilization, all that basic stuff that we're starting to get used to these days, is the fact that it's not weather sealed. Like my GH4 here. I do really like a weather sealed camera, especially if I get caught in the rain. It's like any major, larger camera like that, you just have to be cautious because most of them are not weather sealed in any way. So it is a great camera. I've got a couple of them here. I use them for interviews. I use them for B-roll. I use them for, stuff like that. I don't use them for YouTube because they just aren't the right camera for that. Different tools, different cameras for different jobs. And the C100 is a great A-cam, B-cam situation, in my opinion, for most of your corporate client type of work, and even some indie filmmaking and documentary work and stuff like that. And in 2020, I think it's a perfectly viable camera still. Even at only 1080p, I think it's a very viable camera, and I think it'll be a very viable camera for years to come. Now, will I buy other cameras? Of course I will. I'm a camera geek. I'm a gadget geek. I love this stuff, so I will buy new and different cameras. But I think I'm going to hold on to these for a while, and I think I'm going to keep shooting with them because I really like the image, and my clients really like the image, and that's most important.